Texas Governor Greg Abbott issued an order last night banning COVID vaccine mandates, including for private companies. For more on this, let's turn to former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He's now a CNBC contributor, and he also sits on the boards of both Pfizer and Illumina. He's got a new book out that's called Uncontrolled Spread: Why COVID-19 Crushed Us and How We Can Defeat the Next Pandemic. So let's start on that point, Scott. Where do we stand right now in the pandemic, and what does it mean when you have the governor of Texas saying no COVID vaccine mandates, when you've already had the president issuing his own executive order saying everybody with over 100 employees has to mandate it, or at least make sure they test it every week? What happens now?
Yeah, look, I'm concerned about the political implications of vaccines and vaccination becoming another thing that divides us politically and culturally. I think for a lot of voters, they're not going to be able to make a distinction or a ready distinction between the idea of a mandated vaccine and the idea of taking any vaccine. And I think we're going to see this fight over vaccines bleed into other realms, vaccinations for children, vaccinations for flu. And we're going to see vaccination rates decline across the country now that this is something that people think defines their political virtue. I don't think governors should be stepping in to block private businesses from imposing mandates. If a business thinks it's the only way they can protect their workers or their customers, it should be their prerogative to do that. Just like I don't think the federal government should be stepping in to tell small businesses and private businesses that they have to mandate vaccination. If we could leave this to be local decision-making by businesses and by local authorities, I think that would be optimal. Now, we're not going to do that. We're a long way from that. This now has become a political football, and we're literally going to have the administration running against governors on this mandate, and we're going to have governors running for president in the next cycle on the issue of vaccination. And I think long-term that's going to be corrosive to our overall public health efforts.
Your point is a good one. We're not just talking about COVID vaccines at this point. This is very likely going to spread to other vaccinations. We have seen diseases like measles that we thought we wiped out in the decades and decades ago, 1980s, 1990s. You wouldn't think you'd see this until the beginning of the 90s when it started recirculating. What happened? I looked back, and this is not a new debate. There have been arguments over vaccine mandates going all the way back to before this country was formed, when George Washington was making his troops get inoculated for smallpox. And by the way, back then, there was a 3% fatality rate for people who were getting a smallpox vaccine, because at that point, it was just taking the pus out of a smallpox pustule and forcing it into an open cut. How did we wind up here? Why are we still here?
Yeah, look, we accept vaccine mandates in a lot of contexts. We accept the childhood immunization schedule, and certain vaccines are required for children to attend school. The flu vaccine is required in a lot of settings. For healthcare workers, we require the chickenpox vaccine, hepatitis B, influenza vaccines. And so there are mandates in a lot of settings of private life, and we've come to accept it. And people, by and large, in this country support vaccination. I think now that this has become something that's going to define people politically, and you see political leaders literally running on their support or their opposition for vaccines and vaccine mandates. Again, I don't think a lot of voters are going to nuance this as much as we are, or as much as the politicians are, and make a distinction between a requirement to get the COVID vaccine and the idea of getting the COVID vaccine at all, and a requirement to get any other vaccine and just the idea of getting vaccinations. So a lot of people are going to walk away from this with an assumption that a vaccine is something that the government's telling you to do, and they're going to reflexively oppose it in circumstances where they would have readily accepted it in the past. And that's going to ultimately have an effect. I would suspect 2 years from now, we're going to see vaccination rates come down across the board. And I've been warning my public health colleagues that, we need to watch what the consequences are of our actions. We want to gain incremental vaccination for COVID. Right. We're at 78% of adults right now over the age of 18 with at least one shot. Each increment that we gain comes at a cost, and we need to look at those long-term costs in terms of what we do culturally to ourselves.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.